How did I get a TED Talk? That's a question that I get a lot. And I think the underlying question is that people want to know if they can get a TED Talk by doing the same thing that I did. Now, I didn't think seriously about how to get a TED Talk until I binged them, hardcore. We were up in Pittsburgh. My wife had just received a double lung transplant. She had been in the hospital for 6 months on a ventilator and then another couple of months post-transplant recovering, and she still literally slept 16 hours a day. I was writing a book about our journey and the lessons that I'd learned from it, and every time I took a break, I watched another TED Talk, and sometimes I would seriously procrastinate and just watch TED Talks. We watched so many that at this point, just hearing the droplet sound reminds me of Pittsburgh. It was then that I decided that as soon as I was done publishing my book, I wanted to find a way to deliver a TED Talk myself. Now, I'm going to go briefly into the difference between TED, TEDx. Also, I'll talk about what didn't work for me, and finally, I'll discuss what did work for me. I'll also put this one disclaimer out there that this is the process that worked for me, and it may or may not work for other people, but I feel fairly confident that this approach makes sense and that it should be somewhat applicable in other situations. So I was introduced to TED Talks a few years ago by a former VP of HR, but I just called him Frank. And Frank loved these talks from interesting people that had these insights, and then I started watching them. The more I watched, the more I recognized that some of them had an X after the TED. And what I learned was that those were independently run and organized events. But ultimately, it was very much in the same tone as a TED Talk. The idea was that these events could be held across the country. There were many of them, but they had the same time frame and they had the same focus as far as spreading these ideas. Some events were tagged as university, some as youth, some as education. And if you want to learn all the different denominations and types, you can go to TED.com, click Organize an Event, and then click Event Types, and it'll take you through all the different types. I've added a link below in the article. Now, my original approach was to go to the main TED website and nominate myself to do a talk. I thought, with our crazy journey and the lessons that I learned, I had a lot of material and content that I could discuss, and I also felt it had the excitement of a very interesting story. You see, my wife had gone on a ventilator in a chemically induced coma on New Year's Eve. They didn't expect that she would survive more than a few weeks at most. And they definitely didn't expect her to get off a ventilator without a transplant, which she couldn't qualify for at the time. We had just moved to a new city. I left my job so that I could be there with her. And she stayed on that ventilator for 6 months. And we had a lot of close calls. During that time, I tried to focus on different things I could do to motivate myself, to motivate her, things that we could focus on as far as trying to qualify for a transplant. And I learned quite a few different lessons during that time. And I also knew that I had experience speaking that would also be helpful for a TEDx application. I had spoken at Cystic Fibrosis Foundation events where I shared our story so that people could understand what living with CF was all about. I went to the website, I had that level of confidence, and I nominated myself. Then I waited. Then I waited a little bit longer. Then I nominated myself again. And then I waited. I don't know how many times I nominated myself, but periodically. Then even my mom went on there and nominated me. Now, I don't know if that application actually went in because she contacted me for technical support a couple of times through that process. And my advice is not going to be have your mom nominate you, because A, that didn't work for me, and B, some moms are a little bit biased, and I'm just saying a hard truth here. Your mom might think you're a better speaker than you are, or a little more insightful. So, sorry to say that, but it's true. I decided that TEDx was going to be my way in. So I knew that TEDx had events all across the country, and I wanted to find the right events that I could speak at. So if you go to TED.com, you can find them by clicking Attend and then TEDx Events. It brings up a screen where you can search location and date, and from there you can decide which ones are close enough that you might want to apply to. There was no way to contact the organizers on that site. So after I'd clicked on the event and I learned who the organizers were, I would contact them over LinkedIn. The idea was that it was the least stalker-like way that I could approach somebody and find out what the situation was. Now, as they started getting back to me, I learned pretty quickly that they were booking these events months early. And the speaking roles in these TEDx events were getting booked, from my estimation, about 4 to 5 months before the actual event itself. That would be when they put out the call for speakers. So I needed to contact the organizers by then, or at least find the website and find a way to get to that application. So the other thing that you want to look for at this point, before you go through the application, is look for the theme of the event. You want to try to utilize an idea that ties in with that theme, and if it doesn't, at least try to present your idea in the context of that theme when you're discussing it with the event organizers. So if the organizers didn't get back to me, what I would also do is I would enter TEDx and whatever that location was .com, and that could often get me to a website that worked. If there wasn't a website developed yet, or that didn't get me there, I would just Google search TEDx and the location. Once on the website, there were often more names for organizers, or a contact me section, or possibly even a call for speakers. So at that point, you've got a way to approach them, and usually from the point when the call for speakers goes out, you have roughly 2 weeks to get that application in. So the dates really matter, and it matters to try to stay on top of that. One other note is that locations do matter. You'll probably have to go there more than once. I ended up choosing Pittsburgh, which is 4.5 hours from where I live, but the benefit was that it was the city where my wife received her double lung transplant. So we had some ties to that city. It was a place that we would look forward to going back to, and it just seemed to fit. Now, a 4.5 hour drive is a 9-hour round trip, and when you have to go up there 3 times, that's 27 hours of driving that I did for this event. And that was with one snow day. So pick those events considering the fact that it might involve a lot of travel. Now, the application itself is fairly straightforward. They want to know about your public speaking, they want to know about your credentials, and they want to know about your idea. You should also be prepared to record a 1-minute video that discusses this idea you have and gives them a sense of what your presentation style might be. Mine is linked below in the article if you want to check it out. The next step is to wait and see if you made the first cut. If you make the first cut, you'll have a chance to do a phone interview. Now, I don't know if other sites do in-person interviews. Luckily for me, at a distance, I was able to call in. And you don't need to have a fully flushed out speech at this point, but you want to have a clear point and you want to have a tie-in with the theme of the event. This is also where passion comes into play. They're not looking for somebody who's just trying to check off a box on their bucket list. They're looking for somebody who's passionate about driving a point home. So this is the point when it's good to feel passionately about your idea and really try to help them understand what it is that you're saying. After I did that phone interview, there was about 2 weeks before the final decision came back. So from the point when the call for speakers went out to when they made the final call, in our case, it was about 4 weeks. So another piece of advice is to be good at speaking. You don't have to be perfect at speaking, but be kind of good at it. One thing I learned was that practicing helps you get better at stuff. Now, I'm not sure if I was the first person to figure that out, but I might have been the first person to figure that out. I don't know. What I did to practice for speaking was join my local Toastmasters group. Here in Northern Kentucky, Group 453 is, as they would put it, the world's most nearly perfect Toastmasters group. They can help with all aspects of speaking, from structure to body language to vocal variety. Not only will you get to practice in a safe environment, but you'll also get some pretty good feedback that you can take with you. I even used the opportunity to practice my TEDx talk in front of them before I went into the actual speech. So, I'm not going to lie to you. I was giddy as a schoolgirl when they got back to me and they said that I could speak at this event. Well, I was giddy as a very tough schoolgirl. You know what, forget about the schoolgirl. The idea was that I was excited and it was a great opportunity. And I was looking forward to sharing this idea. Now, I revised and practiced that speech so many times that our cats were sick of it. The idea is that you have 18 minutes to present this idea, and as much as that seems like a lot of time, it's not. So everything in that speech has to lend toward that final goal, that final purpose that you're trying to deliver. My final speech is linked below. It's called The Case for Realistic Optimism. And I hope if you have a chance, click on it and check it out. It's about 16 minutes. And it talks about not only our journey, but one of the approaches that I took as we made it through that journey. You can also check out my book, Lessons from a CF Cornerman, 38 Lessons I Learned During My Wife's Illness and Lung Transplant. And that's on cfcornerman.com. So if you have a chance and you want to check that out, I'd appreciate it. And one final note. Back when we were in Pittsburgh, I'd heard one talk about procrastination. And in that talk, the guy said something that was really interesting. He said, I always wanted to have done a TED Talk. And I just thought that that was very well put because I 100% agreed with that sentiment. And now that I can say I've done one, even with all of the work that was required to not only secure that talk, but to prepare for it and deliver it, it was totally worth it.